In this episode, I'll be chatting with the author of our Book of the Month for October, Janet Jones, and I have some questions from our book reviewers. And if you'd like to read those reviews, you can find those on the website too, from Jenny and Sadie. So Janet is the author of Horse Brain, Human Brain, The Neuroscience of Horsemanship. Janet applies brain research to the training of horses and riders. She earned her PhD from UCLA and taught the neuroscience of perception, language, memory, and thought for 23 years. Janet trained horses at a large stable early in her career, and then later had her own successful training business. She schooled hundreds of green or difficult horses and has competed in lots of disciplines, so hunter, jumper, halter, reining, and western pleasure. So that's a brief introduction. Janet, that's quite a career. Perhaps you could kind of expand on, your life with horses and your studies.
It's really nice to be here, Teresa. Thank you for inviting me. And it's been a very unusual career. And for a long time, I felt like I had two almost different lives going on simultaneously. You know, there was the scientific side and the academic side. And then there was all of this riding and training and all of these horses. And it took me a long time to figure out. I didn't even really figure it out. It was just sort of a sudden aha moment that made me realize that these two things could come together. And that, of course, that would be very satisfying for me, but also that it might be useful for a lot of horses and maybe some of their riders and owners. So it's been really a fun journey with this book.
So when you first started studying neuroscience, did you have a different career in mind when you were doing those studies?
I actually originally intended to become a horse trainer.
Okay.
And so that was sort of my first plan. And of course, as a young woman, I felt that I did not have the finances to really get into that very well, although I did have some opportunities that I could have taken at that time. But I was very young and rather naive, and I really didn't understand exactly what that opportunity meant. So I ended up going into brain science because of a head injury that I incurred in a riding accident. And so that injury created a transient amnesia that lasted for about 2 years. And it fascinated me that anyone's brain would be capable of allowing them to function perfectly normally through their everyday life and not have any memory or knowledge of what they had done. And so that fascination kind of led me to the whole interest in brain science. And then at that point, I began to realize, okay, you know, I have a good steady income as a professor in brain science. And so the horses became more of a kind of, you know, a bit of more of a second track for me until the time when I retired from my career as a professor, and then I opened a horse training business of my own. So
okay, so that probably leads quite well into the first question we have from our reviewers, and that first question is, what inspired you to write Horse Brain, Human Brain?
You know, that happened when I opened my training business after I had spent decades working as a brain scientist. And as soon as I began working again with students, I could see all sorts of things that students and owners attributed to problems that horses had. But I could also see that these so-called problems were really only functions of the way the horse experienced the world. And that the people, because we experience the world so differently, simply were attributing this difference to a form of misbehavior. A good example for that is the fact that humans tend to rely very strongly on vision. Our brains are actually specialized for vision. Horses' brains are specialized for smell, and ours, of course, are not. So often we ignore the kinds of things that horses might be smelling in their environment, and that might cause them to be frightened or nervous or to shy from something. And instead we look all around visually and we say, well, you've seen that a million times. What's the problem here? Yeah. And the fact is that it's not all about sight for a horse. So that would be one very simple example. And I began to think really deeply about what was going on here. And I started to explain to my students why their human assumptions about the way a horse thinks or perceives were really not reliable when it comes to the horse's experience. And as soon as I began to explain those things, I could see light bulbs turn on in my students' heads and in owners' heads, and it was very successful. So I started looking for more examples of that kind of thing. And as soon as I opened my eyes to that and started looking for examples, I found them everywhere. So that was really how the book started.
And how long, out of interest, how long ago did you start writing the book? How long is it something you did over many years, or?
I started actively writing the book about a year before. It took me about a year to write it, and then it takes 9 months to a year for the publication process. But I had written a number of articles in Equus magazine, and some of those articles formed the basis for chapters that later came in the book. So that was a big help to me. It would have taken a longer period of time to write if I hadn't had those chapters. Yeah. And another really nice thing about the Equus magazine articles, there were, I think there have been about 20 of them so far. They gave me a really good way of testing the water for this topic. So I was able, rather than to just jump in and write an entire book, not knowing whether people would really be all that interested in it, I started with just one article. And I found a whole group of readers who were very excited about that article and about that information. And that encouraged me quite a bit.
Okay. So our next question then is, throughout your extensive career as a trainer, which other horsemen and women did you admire most and why?
I have two answers to this question. So my first answer is what I think probably is a more expected answer, but it will show my age. So we'll have to just deal with that. I admired very much when I was a girl, I admired William Steinkraus because of his impeccable equitation over gigantic fences. And many of your viewers might know that the size of Olympic show jumping fences and what we now call Grand Prix fences was enormous back then compared to what we have now. And he could sail over these fences, but still have the most perfect equitation. And as a kid, of course, equitation was being emphasized in my own work. And I thought that was great. I always also liked the fact that William Steinkraus played the violin well. And that showed me that you could be really, really good at your career and still be very good at something that was an avocation or hobby or something that you just really enjoyed. I also was infatuated with Kathy Kusner. She was the only female U.S. Olympic rider that I had ever heard of as a girl. So that made a big impression on me. I would have to include in this list Secretariat's owner, a woman named Penny Chenery, because she believed in her horse and she pulled her family's racing business out of failure by determination and by the willingness to ask questions of experts and then really listen to their answers and follow them. And I would have to add then Denny Emerson for his breadth across riding disciplines. And you mentioned something about my own career earlier that, yes, I believe in riding horses. I don't think it really matters all that much whether I ride them in an English saddle or a Western saddle or bareback, or whether all of that is secondary. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, the sole point of contact is between a horse's brain and a human brain. And whatever sort of leather or clothing comes between is not really all that important, I don't think.
Yeah.
So that's my first answer, which is the kind of the list of people who I really admired when I was young and coming up in this career. And then when I look at my riding life now, and I think about it in a more historical sense, I believe that the people who have been most valuable are the ones that we don't hear about very much. The excellent veterinarian who shows up at midnight in a blizzard when there's a problem. Mm-hmm. The barn staff who keep the horses' stalls and paddocks clean and dry every single day, no matter how bad the weather is. Yeah. The handler, whether rider, driver, whatever, the handler who tries every day to learn more and to be better for the horse's sake. And I really believe in that. I think that's very important. And the rider who spends as much time and effort on a $500 horse as they would spend on a $500,000 horse. I think those are the people in my life now that I look back on and value more than anyone. So.
Yeah, and you're right, because they're all interacting with your horse, especially the handlers. I mean, I can think of times when I've had a horse on full board and I haven't had a good handler, and then that just brings in problems that you then have to solve when you arrive at the weekend. And so, yeah, it really matters who you allow to be around your horse.
It matters very much, and it matters to the horse too. Who is handling that horse and what kind of interaction they're having with all of the humans who work with them, not just with the rider or the trainer.
Yeah. Okay, next question then. Question 3, your book is well written and rather refreshingly for the unscientific among us. So do you think there is a lack of understanding on this subject because of the way the information is mostly delivered? So they're kind of making it too sciencey for
I sure do. I definitely agree with that. Scientific explanation is a whole separate language of its own. And if you go to the scientific literature and you read a journal article about, the frontal pole in the equine brain or something like that. If you're not familiar with that language, it's really like reading Greek. It doesn't make much sense at all. Yeah. And in the case of horsemanship, we have a separate, very specialized language too. So if I talk to scientists about martingales and shying and all of this kind of stuff, they have no idea what I might be talking about. And they don't know what that feels like. It's one thing to explain what shying is, but it's a whole different thing to be on a young horse that suddenly leaps sideways 20 feet at something that you don't know what it is. You have no idea. There was no expectation of that. So we're dealing with two vastly different ways of speaking and thinking, really, that make it hard to apply science to horse questions. But I think there's another problem, too, with neuroscientific language, and that is that the topic is incredibly complicated. So I would ask people to think of trying to understand everything that the human brain does in a day. Right now, for example, you and I are having a conversation and we're speaking back and forth at a very rapid rate of speed, really, when you think about what the brain has to do to pick out every single word that we're using and put it in the proper place in a sentence and have the whole sentence make sense to a number of people. So it's a very intimidating challenge. And that's the human brain. The horse brain is even more of a mystery. And a lot of the horse brain research that's discussed in my book is very new. To give you an example, the very first precise image of a horse's brain wasn't even available until April of 2019. So this material in the book is really very new. A lot of times we run into problems because most non-scientific writers don't understand brain science deeply enough to explain it. And so they try to simplify. And of course, simplification is something that we all need to do to an extent, but it does carry a risk of inaccuracy. So in writing this book, I had to really try to tread that line very carefully to retain the accuracy of the science, but also watch out for the style and the ease of reading to appeal to general readers. And I have to say, I'm really glad that someone asked this question, because bridging the language gap was one of my primary goals in this book. And so I'm glad that it comes across fairly well and seems refreshing to people.
Oh, that's good. And I know that reviewer, she said she consumed the whole book in a weekend. She was... so.
Great. That's great. Yeah.
Okay. Next question then. So how much did your study of understanding the horse's brain help you as a trainer or coach?
Oh, it helped me tremendously. In my early years of training horses, before I had studied brains, I rode and trained well, but frankly, my focus was on getting horses to do what we wanted them to do. And I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about why a particular technique succeeded or failed. I just used it. If it failed, I tried something else, but I wasn't trying to analyze what was really going on there. But by the time I opened my own training business, I had been teaching brain science every day for 23 years. And so I was steeped in that, and my mind was prepared without me even thinking about it to just analyze what I saw and felt with horses in a physiological kind of way. So I think also I began to see training problems in terms of the interaction between two species brains. And it's not an accident that the title of this book is Horse Brains, Human Brain, because you have to consider both halves of the team. You can't just focus on horse brains, for example, because the horse's brain, when we work together in a team, is constantly affected by the human brain of the other half of the team. So everything we know about their brains is filtered through ours and vice versa. It's a two-way street. And I think that's a very important thing for people to keep in mind.
So if I was, say, having a lesson with you, what sort of things would you be perhaps picking up on that's unique to you?
I would be talking a lot about why. So very often in a lesson, a trainer is telling a student to do things, and I do that too, of course, but I always try to explain why we are doing this. So in a very early lesson, I might be saying, keep your heels down. And then I would say, why you're keeping your heels down, which is, I think, the step that a lot of trainers ignore throughout people's careers as riders. And the same, it's not just about riders, but handlers of all kinds, farriers, veterinarians. I want to tell people when they ask me something about a horse, why I think that's happening. And if they have a bad reaction from a horse, if it's a handler who walks up, maybe and approaches a horse in an unusual way and the horse jumps a little bit, I try to explain why that happened. So I think that would be the biggest difference.
Mm-hmm.
You might have to ask my students that, Teresa. They might have a different answer.
Okay, next question then. So in your book, under the section Training by Reward, you state it works best without food. Could you expand on that and the science that supports it?
Yes. I think this is ripe to become a point of misunderstanding in my book. And it's one of those areas that I wish I had perhaps added a little more explanation. Most current techniques of training by positive reinforcement involve holding or pocketing whole bags of edible treats while asking horses to perform certain behaviors. And the trainer then doles out these treats copiously. And I've seen people do this with maybe doling out 30 treats in 5 minutes as the horse's behavior is shaped over a short period of time. The horse knows that the treats are there, and the horse knows that they taste good. So he's looking for ways to get them through performance. That is not training by reward. That is training by incentive or lure. And it has a different neurological basis inside the horse's brain. So when horses learn, there's at least two groups of neurons that activate at the same time. And when they do that, they cause brain chemicals to be released. And dopamine is one of these chemicals. And I'm sure your readers are familiar with that, if for no other reason than having read this book. It acts like a kind of glue that holds the new association together. Lures or incentives do not produce the same kind of dopamine release that rewards do. And the strongest dopamine release occurs when a reward is a surprise. So it's very important to maintain that element of surprise. If you've got a whole bag of treats and the horse knows it, you're luring him into a performance, and there's nothing surprising about those treats. So this brings up kind of a related problem, which is that a lot of people nowadays like to feed indiscriminate treats to their horses. The carrots and apples that are given because the horse is cute or hungry, or maybe he's thin, or the owner wants him to fall in love with her. There's all sorts of, reasons that we tend to do this. But indiscriminate treats destroy the element of surprise that is necessary for that strong dopamine release. And lures do not allow the strong dopamine release. So both of those things weaken the trainer's power. And if we have that knowledge, then we can adjust what we do a little bit. As you know from that section in the book, I use non-edible rewards almost all of the time. A horse has to do something really special to get an edible treat out of me. And I do not use lures. I do not use indiscriminate treats at all. And I can say that this is a technique that works with the horse's brain instead of against it. And it's very effective. It works beautifully. As soon as you learn how to do this and you begin using this method that I call training by reward, I think that most people will see that it's extremely effective, and horses will learn very quickly in that way, and they retain the information for a longer period of time.
Okay, interesting. So what's an example then of a non-edible reward?
Oh, there's all kinds of things that horses like. So for example, if you're working with a horse, maybe you're riding this horse and you're trotting around, just coming back to a walk is a reward. Stroking the horse on the neck is a reward. Words of praise are a conditioned reward. So you have to teach the horse that, good boy or good girl is connected with something pleasant. But all of those things are rewards. And there's a list in the chapter in my book on training by reward that probably includes, I don't know, at least 20 different items that are very strong, non-ethical.
Lots of options for people. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. And then the final question from our reviewers, and possibly the most important one, is, are you planning to write another book in the future?
Yes.
Good.
Thank you. I love the process of composing books. I'm a strange person, I guess, because everybody else complains about writer's block and all this, and I just don't have that problem. I'm very lucky, and I truly enjoy the process of wrangling words into sentences. I generally write in the mornings, and then I test my ideas on horseback in the afternoons. And right now, my time has been taken up with talking to people about this book and answering questions like the ones that you've asked, and getting my philosophy of brain-based horsemanship better known so that people can use it. But I have much more to say about the topic of the neuroscience of horsemanship, and I'm anxious to get back to my computer and produce the next one.
Oh, great. Look forward to that.
Thank you.
Okay, so that was all of the questions that we had. So for people watching or listening to the podcast, what's the best way to follow you or to buy your book?
Okay, let's see. In the UK and Europe, Quiller Publishing distributes my book. So you can check out their website at quillerpublishing.com. And I can give you an address to put on the show notes too, if you want to do that. I also have a Facebook page at Janet Jones Horsebrains. So if anybody kind of wants to follow the day-to-day updates, that's very welcome to do that. My own website contains book reviews, pictures, video and podcast interviews like this one, done by other people with other questions. And there are links to related content that people might be interested in. It also includes a blog called True Training, and this is named after my young horse, True North. I call him True, and I started with these blogs when he was 3 so that people could kind of see how brain-based horsemanship actually works in real life with a real horse. So that website is janet-jones.com. And I welcome everybody to come and have a look.
Great, and I'll put all of those links in the descriptions to go with the video and the podcast. And also, I'd like to thank Quiller Publishing as well, because they provided the review books that we sent to Jenny and Sadie. So yeah,
good. That's wonderful. Well, I just want to say I really enjoy that you have this book club and that you involve the book club members in writing these reviews and asking questions. It's a wonderful experience for all of us. And as an author, I really enjoy hearing the questions that readers have.
So. Oh, thank you. And thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate it.